Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Karst Woudstra's play Burying the Dog, which I'm reading out of Dutch Plays by Nick Hearn Books International. So, I'm going to start with this. I don't mean to slut-shame the Dutch. If you're Dutch and you're watching this, I apologize if this comes across as a generalization or offensive. Based on the plays in this collection, the Dutch are very concerned about Nazism and non-normative sexualities. I don't know, man. Ludwig de Boer's The Buddha of Ceylon and Judith Hertzberg's The Wedding Party both deal with Nazism, the Dutch occupation by the Nazis, the Holocaust, things like this. The Buddha of Ceylon, Arne Sierens' drummers, even Hertzberg's The Wedding Party, to a lesser extent, deal with questions of sexuality, sexual morality. These seem to be the central themes for at least Dutch and Flemish playwriting in the 80s and 90s, if nothing else. And Woudstra's Burying the Dog brings together those two themes, as we'll see. So this is a play with three characters. We have Peter, Bart, and Muriel. Peter lives in Amsterdam. He has this sort of half-converted apartment that had been, I think, industrial space. It had been an office bathroom or something like that, and he is in the process of converting it into a proper apartment. Muriel is kind of his girlfriend. They sort of bizarrely break up partway through the play in a sequence that didn't entirely make sense to me. And as with many of the plays in this collection, I've mentioned this in videos about other plays, I'm not sure if it's a translation issue, I'm not sure if it's I'm not seeing it on stage issue, or if I'm just missing something that's actually incredibly obvious. Not sure. But, and then we got Bart, who's Peter's older brother. Bart is from... I can't remember where he's from. He's from a small town, the name of which escapes me at the moment. Possibly Leighton, but that doesn't sound right. I think there was a character in another one of the plays in this collection who was from Leighton. I think that's where I'm getting it, but it doesn't matter. He's from a small town. He has very negative opinions about Amsterdam, the big city, in much the way that, say, many Americans from small towns, rural areas, things like this, have negative impressions of places like New York or Chicago or LA, or people from, say, rural England have negative impressions of London, whatever it is. You get what I'm saying. Bart is also mildly racist. He doesn't seem to be super, violently racist or something like this, but clearly their dad had some problematic views. Peter, in fact, thinks that his father was a Nazi. So this is the first element of the seeming Dutch theatrical obsession with Nazism and the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. Now, Peter acknowledges that his father would not have been a full-fledged Nazi at the time of the occupation because he was a child. And so what Peter thinks is that his father got into Nazism sort of as a hobbyist, I guess, never as an official member of the Dutch Nazi Party, but he sort of got into Nazism after the war was over. And of course, the Netherlands was occupied by the Nazis. There was a resistance. My sense, and I've said this before, and again, this may not be entirely accurate, is that the Dutch resistance was not as active as the resistance in places like France or Poland or Greece that had very, very strong, what became Yugoslavia, places that had very strong anti-fascist partisan movements. My sense is that in the Netherlands, it was a more subdued resistance, a smaller scale resistance. Again, fact check me on that. If I'm wrong, I'd love to know. Put it in the comments. But after the war, there's a very definite sense, as there was throughout much of Europe, that the Nazis were bad. That being a Nazi was a bad thing to be, which was, up until fairly recently, a thing that we here in the US believed. But now, we've got Republicans who are overtly referring to themselves as Nazis on the internet, who are picking up neo-Nazi talking points. Anyway, that is not what this video is about. I stopped myself before I went off on a rant. So Peter is convinced that his dad was a Nazi. His dad does seem to have been pretty racist, pretty xenophobic, and both Peter and Bart seem to accept that. Bart himself moderately xenophobic, moderately racist, whatever it is. Peter more consciously cosmopolitan. He does sort of say, yeah, I still feel myself sort of slipping into these moments where I'm stereotyping, where I'm forming prejudiced opinions, whatever it is, and I consciously stop myself because I've spent my whole life being ashamed that my dad was a fascist. So that's going on. Bart is kind of defending the dad, but he's not, for most of the play, he doesn't feel like he's sort of at liberty to give his full explanation. He does eventually explain what was actually going on with the dad. And I don't know that it's better than him being a fascist. It's not ideal. I guess it's better than him actively, say, going out and beating up minorities in the street. I'll give it that. But that's a fucking low-ass bar. So anyway, Muriel comes in. She's got a phantom pregnancy, and the whole relationship between Peter and Muriel is really kind of weird. And Muriel's basically like, hey, Bart, you're real dreamy. Let's hook up. And Bart's like, actually, fun fact, I've come to Amsterdam to hook up with somebody else. I'm cheating on my wife. And Peter's like, you shouldn't cheat on your wife. And Bart's like, hey, man, shut up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to leave my wedding ring here. And I'm going to go have sex with this woman I met on vacation. And Peter is like, don't do that. And Bart's like, I'm doing that. So then Peter has Muriel call this woman and pretend to be Bart's wife and basically just ask to talk to him. Basically with the intention just being to ruin Bart's night. Bart eventually comes back. And so when Bart had first arrived at Peter's apartment, he had been followed onto the tram and then off of the tram by this dog. And he was trying to escape this dog. We find out when Bart returns, theoretically from his extramarital affair, that the dog had been hit by a car. And Bart, it had been run over by a number of cars, and Bart sort of dragged its body off of the road. Some of you who have watched a lot of my videos, if there is such a person, will know that I have a big problem with violence against animals, cruelty to animals. It's not a thing that I thematically approve of. I get that it's a real part of life. I don't like that. I don't like addressing it. But this dog the death of this dog produces a major change in Bart. He decides that he needs to come clean to his wife, that he does not really care about her, that he is not interested in remaining in the marriage. And he needs to come clean to Peter about what was really going on with their parents. And what we learn, basically, is that Bart and their father had talked about Peter, because Peter had found a bunch of Nazi magazines in the attic, and at one point he basically confronted his father with them. He just sort of came down to breakfast, he threw these Nazi magazines down on the table, and he said nothing about it. Bart and the dad had talked about that, and about what was going on, what he could do about it, etc. And they sort of decided that the best thing to do was actually just to let Peter think that the dad was a Nazi. What it turns out is that mom and dad had a Nazi fetish, basically. It's sort of not exactly that quite, but basically they had loud Nazi sex. Nazi-themed sex, I guess I should say. So they would typically play very loud music, like Wagner or whatever it was, while the boys were upstairs trying to sleep. And Bart would go down and basically be like, hey, we can't sleep because you're playing really loud music at night. And he essentially sort of caught or observed his parents having their weird Nazi-themed sex. I don't generally approve of kink shaming, but Nazis are bad. #woke. Deal with it. And so it became their sort of weird three-way secret of like the parents having this loud Nazi-themed sex and Bart like watching them from the stairs or something. It's not entirely clear to me what was going on, but it's a weird situation. It's not a sort of healthy relationship to have here. I'm gonna say that. I'll render that judgment. And so the brothers who had been estranged for years and years and years, do sort of manage to bond over this. And Bart evokes this happy memory of when they were kids, Peter would take baths and then come and sort of sit with Bart, and Bart would read him fairy tales. And it's there's this very strange bit. Again, I'm being very judgmental about this, and I'm on the fence about that. But there's this very strange bit toward the end where Bart is sort of remembering this moment, and Peter is not feeling good. There's a whole storyline behind that I'm not going to go into because I don't think it's that important. And so Bart is reading to him this fairy tale from when they were kids. And Bart has already sort of said that he has always been scared that because of what he saw his parents doing, that he would incline toward some sort of violent sexuality, fascist themed sexuality, whatever it was. So they weren't sure what fairy story Peter wanted to hear, but he wanted to hear this story to help him feel better. And so Bart says, the fairy story that you remembered that I always read to you, question. And Peter says, I don't know. It's a long time ago now. Bart says, yes. Peter says, but did you like doing that, reading to me? Bart says, yes. Peter says, and then I'd come and sit with you. Bart says, yes. Peter says, on your lap? Bart says, yes. After you'd had your bath on Saturday night. Don't you remember any more? Peter says, no, I don't remember anything cozy like this, and that sounds very like that, and this sounds very cozy. Bart says, yes. Peter says, I must have felt terribly safe with you. Bart says, yes. Peter says, and with me you never had that sort of fantasies? Bart says, what sort of fantasies? Peter says, that you have with sex? Bart says, no, of course not. Not with you. I wouldn't have wanted sex with you, would I? Peter says, no. Bart says, no, not that I know. Peter says, what did you think then when I was sitting on your lap like that? Bart says that I'd like to eat you up because you smelled so lovely and had those sturdy little legs. Peter says, isn't that kind of the same thing? Bart says, as what? Peter says, that you wanted to eat me. That's not so easy. Try it. Bart says, no, thank you. You haven't looked that appetizing for a long while. Certainly not now. Peter says, pity. I wouldn't find it bad at all to be eaten by you, I think. I don't fucking know what to make of that. That's an odd scene to be played between two brothers, in my opinion. Particularly two brothers who, until this evening, which has gone fairly horribly across the board, they were violently estranged from one another. Yeah, I don't even know where to go with it. That's all I got to say at the end of this video. I don't know.